Now, to the death of the great Australian dream, of a quarter-acre block, so you can have your own home, your own patch of Australian dirt under your feet. You already know the Albanese government is breaking his promise to cut your power bills for $275, you know that. Well, last year, Treasurer Jim Chalmers made another promise that the government also looks certain to break as the housing crisis just gets worse and worse.
For too many, the great Australian dream of home ownership seems completely out of reach. I am proud to announce that we have just struck a new national housing accord between governments, investors and industry to build the affordable homes that our country desperately needs and to help tackle our housing crisis. The ambition of this accord is big and it's bold. It's an aspiration to build 1 million new, well-located homes over 5 years from 2024.
A million homes built in 5 years, 1 million. In fact, the Housing Industry Association today warns we won't come anywhere near that many. And what makes things worse, of course, is that the government has meanwhile let in 400,000 immigrants in a single year. That's the population of Canberra, with at least 650,000 more to come in the next 2 years. Total, more than 1 million. That's left us with a critical shortage of housing, with rents soaring already and young Australians already queuing for the few properties that are left to rent. But that's not all of it. Many middle-class kids now particularly have no hope of affording a home anywhere near where they were raised, and even Australians who can buy a home now to get ones squeezed into tiny, tiny blocks, forget the big backyard, forget the tree out the back. And for some suburbs like Box Hill in Melbourne, they've gone from having a suburban shopping strip to, well, what looks like the start of a new high-rise city. Now, I think something that we thought was typically Australian, a way of life, is getting out of reach for younger Australians. But can we turn this around, or does it even matter? Joining me are Graham Wolfe. He's the Managing Director of the Housing Industry Association. Danni Hunter, she was the Victorian head of the Property Council of Australia. She now heads Hunter Collective, a strategic advisory team. First of all, Graham, thank you for coming on. Why aren't we building enough homes?
Well, the industry's faced an enormous amount of challenges over the last couple of years, with supply of materials being constrained, labour being constrained, delays in the construction, the floods that we've seen, and some issues around the time it takes to finish those homes that have already started. We've got an incredible amount of homes to finish, but as they come to completion, we're not seeing the demand for new housing coming through, primarily because of the interest rates and access to finance.
It's a whole concatenation of things, and at the same time you've got this massive immigration thing, and where are people going to live? But Danni, homes are also getting smaller, and they have been for some time, or at least the blocks are, right? They're sitting big homes on tiny little blocks with almost no yard. Why is that?
Well, Andrew, I think it's really important to realise and to take note of the fact that this is not a crisis that has evolved over the last 10 interest rate rises. This is a crisis that has evolved over decades, and decades of us under-producing and under-planning for the growth and the population growth that Australia is inevitably experiencing. We tapered off a little bit during COVID, but it certainly is coming back. Australia is, and our capital cities primarily, have been built on population growth. And to Graham's point about there being a scarcity of labour and materials at the moment in the construction industry, the irony is that we need immigration to be able to contribute to those skills and to be able to build the workforces that our country needs in the future. Now, the housing piece in that is really, really important, as we've seen. And we've seen the housing industry start to mature over the last couple of years, and certainly the Albanese government's policy agenda is going to look to supercharge that. Housing in Australia has a lot of evolving to do if it's going to be an industry and a market that actually delivers for the affordability, accessibility and livability that we want in our homes. But yes, homes have become smaller because they've become less affordable. And certainly what we need to focus on is really strong and sometimes tough conversations with the community as to how our cities and regions and suburbs are going to evolve over the next coming few years and decades, because we certainly need more housing.
We've been having those arguments. I was covering them like 30 years ago, and it's never resolved, and we're getting less land set aside for housing. It's also got to be, you know, infill in the big cities. We don't want the sprawl. We can't afford it. And people are living with finding it harder to find a house to rent, harder to afford one that they can buy. And when they do find one, it tends to be in an outer suburb, increasingly with a very small garden. It seems, Graham, it seems that this great Australian dream is getting more and more out of reach. Does it matter that much? Is there a moral dimension to this?
Oh, there is a moral dimension. There's a social dimension too. People want and need their own home. They want a backyard for their kids to play in. Some people are happy to live in an apartment. Others want a backyard that they can watch their children play football or cricket or tennis or whatever it might be in the backyard. There's a social dimension to this. They don't want their children out on the streets. Security is a really important issue for parents. Owning your own home brings that level of security, both in terms of raising children and also financial security. But unfortunately, Andrew, the governments around Australia don't know where the supply of land is coming from for the next 5 years. So, you know, the industry's trying to provide the houses that we need, but nobody really knows in aggregate where those blocks of land are going to come from, let alone how we're going to finance the infrastructure that's needed for them. And it's one of the areas that Federal Treasury, through NIFIC, the National Housing Investment and Financing Corporation, was meant to address. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem like it's happening at the moment. But yeah, we really do need an inventory of land supply for this country that will take us out beyond 5 and 10 years.
And it needs, Andrew, to come from not just our green.
Well, Danny, this is why I can't agree with you on the immigration rate. For a start, it's insanely too big. I mean, you can get some skilled workers in, but this is just out of proportion. There's almost no Western country with that proportionate immigration intake. But we have not been able to agree on releasing that land that Graham's talking about. And as a consequence, the Australian way of life in the cities has been profoundly changed. And I think this is not for the best. Not in terms of social health, some of the factors Graham mentioned, for instance.
Which is why we have to literally supercharge the solutions here. We've come so far, and it's every headline, it's every rate rise, it's every dinner table conversation type of problem now. This is at absolute breaking point. The accessibility, affordability, livability of our homes, be they apartments, townhouses, units, homes, they are paramount in terms of what Australians are thinking about right now. State and local governments have unfortunately just simply not lifted their weight. They haven't lifted their weight when it comes to housing supply and also the equality of that housing supply. And when I talk about that, I mean inner suburbs doing heavy lifting just as much as suburbs in the outer greenfield areas. And we haven't asked them to do any better. In fact, we've let them off lightly.
Yeah, but look at those outer suburb developments. You can go for, you know, half an hour after half an hour and half an hour, you see all these little tiny little blocks. That's the way they've done it. Tiny little blocks. It looks so soulless, miles from anything you want to go and see. Honestly, Graham. And the other thing that I really worry about is this. You had a long list of social impacts, and I think that you are absolutely correct. I would add this. The way that we are, isolating people, particularly newcomers to this country in far-off suburbs, that was all they can afford to start with, that's not healthy. And the other thing, while houses are so expensive, young men who need socialising, who need that sense of responsibility, something to look after, something to call their own, need to put in roots, they're not getting that opportunity.
So in my
housing is going to become more expensive.
Graham, go ahead.
Later on, housing is going to become more expensive later on this year as the governments around Australia introduce new regulatory changes that apply more stringent building requirements for houses from October and onwards. And now's not the time to be adding cost to building. Now's not the time to be adding cost to home ownership and impacting affordability.
But this is the thing, isn't it, Danny? I mean, housing really is a moral issue. It's not just an economic one. You've got to get people a sense of their own home, in their own community, in their own country. We can't have what we're seeing developing now.
In my view, Andrew, there's a real shift in the dynamics about how we deliver housing in this country that we're going to see over the next 5 years. There's three things that are going to happen. The social and affordable housing industry is maturing. It's starting to attract institutional grade capital, which will supercharge the production of those homes because it will be financed and it will be invested in, it will be well managed. And we need social and affordable housing. Secondly, build to rent is a concept that Australians are becoming more familiar with, even in just the terminology. And this is where you rent for a longer period of time with stability and access to amenity. Build to rent will actually really change the way we live in Australia and give us a third way of living. And finally, the way that we deliver housing around transport infrastructure investment. We haven't done that well enough, strategically enough here in Australia, but big projects like the suburban rail loop, debate it if we want, that's another segment.
Yeah,
but those projects will actually concentrate housing supply in areas that are serviced and well serviced by infrastructure.
I've heard that argument
pointed to Box
for
Hill.
decades.
You pointed to Box Hill.
I've heard it for decades. Yeah, but it costs a fortune, this stuff, and nothing seems to be getting done. And I would suggest cut the costs like Graham suggests and also stop the immigration or limit it severely until we do have a solution. Danni Hunter, Graham Wolfe, thank you so much. I think this is such an important conversation. This is about the socialising of our young. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.